What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you with a very special, fun, and what I believe to be a super entertaining episode. I got to speak with Alex Squadron. He is the author of the book I'm holding up on screen now. If you're watching, Life in the G, Minor League Basketball and the Relentless Pursuit of the NBA. Had a great discussion with him. This book, just as brief background, we get into a lot of the process, some wild stories from it. I talked to Alex about it, but it follows the Birmingham Squadron, who, despite having the same name as Alex, he's not related to them in any way. I don't know why people would necessarily think that, but that was a little fun anecdote from the book as well about him being last name Squadron and then following a team that's called the Squadron. I did ask him about that. He follows this team. He's with them the entire step of the way. He is in meetings, in the locker room. He's in their draft war room. That wasn't really like a war room as he describes it. The access they gave him was unprecedented. The work he did was fantastic. It really sheds a light on the disparate lifestyles in the NBA versus the G League, but you're also just getting a sense as to what's on the line for these players, what's going on in their lives, some of the decisions that they're making where they're passing on a lot of money elsewhere. Throughout the book, it does follow what you would call four main characters in Zylan Cheatham, Malcolm Hill, Jared Harper, and Joe Young. But there's just a lot of other stuff in the book, whether it's coaches or management. The G League showcases is highlighted. There's talks with past and present G Leaguers. Andre Ingram wrote the foreword for this book. There's a lot of great stories in it. So look, I get recommended books. And I don't necessarily, this one was recommended by Mir and Fader, who anyone who listens to this podcast knows is one of my favorite writers of all time. The recommendation did not disappoint. It will be going up behind me because it is that good. So I would check it out, but definitely check out the conversation. The link to buy it will be in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. I think you will enjoy the discussion, even if you don't end up buying the book, but please support Alex. We have a great community here. Appreciate every single one of you. Pick up the book for you, yourself, or someone. It is the holiday season. Again, link in the podcast and YouTube description. Let's get to talking with Alex Squadron, author of Life in the G, Minor League Basketball, and the Relentless Pursuit of the NBA. Alex, welcome to the HardwoodKnocks podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. As everybody knows from listening to the intro, you're the author of Life in the G. It's a fantastic book about life in the G League, minor league basketball, and the relentless pursuit of the NBA. Forward is by Andre Ingram. That was a fun forward. I asked you about that before we even started because I was so excited that Mr. G League himself was in there. I have so many questions. This was a great book. I'll start with this. How the heck are you doing, man?
Well, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. As I told you before, I'm a huge fan of the podcast, so this is super cool for me. Yeah, man, it's been crazy since the book came out, but everything's gone well, so I can't complain.
Book you told me came out in October.
Mm-hmm.
The over/under of the number of interviews you've had to do, setting it at like 1 million. Where are you at?
Yeah. I'm gonna go over 1 million, I think. No, I should say I'm always down to do more. So if anybody's listening to this, for sure hit me up. It's been great. I mean, it's exhausting because you can never really do enough, but it's a lot. As soon as that book comes out, you just hit the ground running, and it really doesn't stop. It just keeps going.
Has there been anything about the sort of the gamut of interviews that has surprised? Is it having to talk about yourself more? Is it like any questions about the book that have been thrown around? They've just been like, is the experience been, what surprised you most about sort of running the gamut of that media interview experience following this?
It's a great question. I think I haven't done a lot of like on air or like podcast type stuff. I've really just been, behind the camera writing for most of my career. So I think I was pretty nervous about doing all that stuff. And I think what surprised me is how quickly you kind of get used to it. And I mean, it helps that I'm obviously super passionate about the book and about this subject and stuff like that. But I was definitely anxious about just like doing any of this stuff. And then, a couple of weeks go by and you start to get into a rhythm, and now it's like super fun. I love doing it. And I definitely did not expect that to be, kind of my takeaway after this stretch. So it's been great.
Now, what prompted you to buy and name a G League team after yourself? You acknowledged that right off the bat in the book, which I think was important, but it was also hysterical following the squadron. You did tell me, though, before we started that the players actually thought you were a plant. Is that what you said?
It's hard to blame them. I mean, I just like kind of shows up on kind of day one of training camp, and it's like, this guy's going to write a book about the team, and oh yeah, his name is Alex Squadron, and the team's name is Birmingham Squadron, and there wasn't much else offered, which was totally fine. I mean, I did want to be kind of like a fly on the wall. I didn't want to, you know, as much as possible, I wanted to kind of not be seen because I wanted it to be exactly what the experience was if I wasn't there. Um, so it's hard to blame them for thinking like this guy must have some affiliation to the team because my name is literally the name of the team. But I do have to clarify here and then like right away in the book that like I am not connected to them in any way. It's like purely a coincidence. I did choose them because of the name thing. That was definitely, I would say, the number one factor. Because I knew I wanted to follow a team, and then it was like kind of random, like which one am I going to
Mhm.
pick? And then it was just like, all right, this would be kind of silly for me to ignore the fact that one of them is my name. It's kind of like destiny, or it's telling me which one to choose, you know? So um, that was the reason I initially chose them. But yeah, I had to clarify, or I've had to clarify through all these interviews and to the team, even when I was down there, that I'm just I'm just a normal writer who happens to have the same name as the team.
You mentioned in the book that your dream was to write a book, and you do have a pretty extensive background in sports, but was there like a source, inspiration, or flashbulb moment that made you want to write about this topic, which is just
Mhm.
outlined in the intro since we haven't gotten into too much in the plot just yet? Is like you're following this G League team. There are the four main characters, but you cover, there's so many different between the coaches and the front office, and you're talking to family members, you're talking about past G League players. Was there like a flashbulb inspiration for like this is the type of book or exact
Mhm.
subject matter I want to write slash cover?
I don't think there was like a flashbulb moment. It wasn't like I was just watching the G League one day and was like, oh my God, it wasn't nothing like that. But because I really want, like, it was my dream, like I said, to write a book. And so I was really searching for a subject, and basketball was always like my area of expertise. And there's been a lot of basketball books, more than most people realize. And so there's just not that many subjects that haven't been covered at all. And the G League, like shockingly, just like there's very little coverage of it. And every year it was growing and it was becoming more and more important to like NBA teams. And
Mhm.
there were just more and more players coming from the G League and having a major impact in the NBA. And it just felt like the timing was like perfect. Like no one's done this. I want to write my first book. Um, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but like I know the access would probably be a lot easier than what I can get to NBA teams, and so I think all of those things kind of combined to push me to do it. Just like the fact that there was nothing there, and yeah, I could kind of be the first one to um, to capture this experience and to document kind of the journey of guys trying to get to the NBA. So um, yeah, no flashbulb moment, but definitely like once I decided that that was kind of the route I wanted to take, and I started like looking into revisiting Andre Ingram's story, or all these G League guys and their kind of inspiring stories. That was when I was like, okay, I got something here. Like this could really be something compelling, and yeah, like I said, something that's never been done before. So uh, those were the major factors.
It becomes clear throughout the book, and I think that's like the most exciting hook of the book is like you were with this team for the end, like you were there, you were on the
Mhm.
ground. But I was also told that you made this decision to get that access to follow this team at a time where the pandemic was just still going on. You make this decision, and you did not, if I'm correct, did not have a book deal lined up, which is just that takes some fucking gall that I envy beyond all
Thank you.
reason. What went into that decision? How tough of a decision was it? Was there anyone who like kind of influenced you or helped you come to like, no, I'm gonna do this, or was it, I really want to be an author. I want to write a book. This is what I want to write about. So I'm just gonna do this.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I guess I should say the first person I should name is Ben Osborne, who was the editor in chief at Slam when I first started working at Slam, and he's always been like a mentor of mine and just a huge like impact on my career. He was like the first person I called when I had the idea, and he knew that I wanted to, get into writing books, and uh, I outlined everything, told him I didn't have a deal. Um, and kind of was expecting him to let me know the risk and walk me through kind of the pros and cons. And he was just like, go for it. Like, this is what you want to do. It's a great idea. I think that there's going to be something there. Like, you should take the leap. And that was really, for me, like, if he says like jump, I'll do it. So he was a huge influence. And then there's been so many writers like that just like inspired me or supported me along the way. Mir and Fader, our mutual friend, has been like incredible. Jeff Perlman's always been like an inspiration to me and his career. And a couple guys who came through Slam, your own Weitzman, Jake Fisher, those guys wrote books. And then I think like going down there again, just having like my family, my friends supporting me, believing in the idea. And, I think it was less like, I mean, obviously I believed in myself to be able to do it, but I think it was more like, I really believed there would be a story there. Like, I just knew that there would like, the risk was obviously big that I wouldn't get a book, but I just knew that there would be at least a compelling like narrative to follow. And so if there was that, then, then the kind of burden falls on my shoulders to deliver something that, honors that story. So, yeah, I mean, the risk made it a little, nerve wracking for sure, but it was also super, fun. And, to be able to just like get that access and be so fully embedded, like, I kind of told myself throughout the process, regardless of what happens, this has been just such an awesome experience. So, luckily it worked out too. So, so
Yeah,
both things were.
book was incredible. So
Thank you.
how do you go about getting that access? Was it surprisingly easy? Was it challenging? Was there an element of the Birmingham Squadron be like, what, someone wants this much access to us? Yeah, sure. Why the hell not? Like, what was that process sort of like?
I would say shockingly easy. And
Okay.
I think I got lucky. I mean, partly it's just because it's the G League and they don't get as much coverage. And I think players, coaches at that level are just eager to tell their stories because they haven't really gotten the chance to. But the process was really like I was gonna move down there from New York, so like I was gonna basically pick up my life and completely just restart for 7 months. So before I did that, I wanted to make very clear that like, this is what I need. Like I'm not going to come down there if I don't get this access. So they asked me to make a list of everything that I wanted to be a part of. And so I did that. And yeah, like a week later, they were like, this is all approved. This all looks good to us. And I think it was even better than what I had outlined on that list, because the team, I ended up kind of becoming, obviously becoming a part of the team. And as the season goes on, players start to open up, coaches start to open up, and then the access becomes even more. So, yeah, that's a huge like shout out to the Squadron organization, the Pelicans, the affiliate, because I think it went all the way up there.
Mhm.
And then I think it just speaks to how little attention is paid to the G League, that they were willing to give me really full access. I mean, I film sessions, coaches meetings, team dinners. I traveled with them. So it was pretty much anything that the team had going on. Assuming I was available, I was there. So um, that was a treat. I was super lucky.
What was whether it was fascinating, surreal, or most useful part of that access? Because there are a bunch of moments in the book that stick out where it's
Mhm.
like, oh, he was in the room for that. And the one that was the panic button chapter, when there's the players only meeting type thing, was just like, wow. Like the fact that you were in close proximity to that. But was there any like, what was the most useful aspect of having that type of access?
I think film sessions. Like I just think
Yeah.
that when you're like, I had been writing about basketball for my entire professional career, and a fan of basketball since I was 2, and uh, I feel like I felt like I had a good sense for like I would understand a little bit of what was going on, and then you're standing in there and you're watching them kind of break down film, and you realize that like you know nothing. I mean, just like it's a different language. The amount that just goes into, I mean, just like every single detail. I mean, they break down everything. And yeah, I mean, just like you really can't hide on an NBA court. I mean, when we look at a player and say maybe like, oh, what is he doing? Or we're kind of criticizing him. There's a lot of things that he's doing right that we're not seeing. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that he's probably doing wrong that we're not seeing, but we don't really know how he's doing in a lot of cases. I mean, obviously there's certain cases where you can tell, but it's just the amount, the attention to detail, and how much goes into every little thing. That's, to me, was the most enlightening and the most fascinating to see up close.
I would have found I think the film sessions for sure. I probably those would have gotten tedious for me because I would have hate not knowing what's going on all the time. Like, I don't like to be exposed for how much I don't know. I want to be able to bullshit my way throughout
For
life.
sure.
Have to sit through those would have forced me to be too self-reflective, I think.
I tried like right away. Like, I'm like, all right. So there, day one, I'm like, okay, what is going on? And then I'm like, I need to learn this. Like, this was, and I think that was the response. Like, I was like, all right, I can't be just the dumbest person in this room. Like, I have to at least have a sense for what's going on, obviously to write about it. And then just like for my own like pride of like, I need to just like, I call myself a basketball writer. I played through high school and I've been a fan forever. Like, I need to get a grip on this. And I would say that my knowledge of it is not even close to where, all those guys are at. But by the end, I could at least understand what they were talking about and follow those sessions a little bit better than day one, for sure.
And you mentioning the film sessions made me think, and it comes across in the book, you appreciate it, but it gives you a newfound appreciation so like, look at Zylan Cheatham has to learn the Jazz playbook and the Heat playbook. And it's just like, you didn't make it a throwaway comment, but it's just the way he reacted was like, yeah, I had these materials and like, I just had to read them. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, it's not even possible.
I mean, yeah, it is like, talk about like having to cram I mean, you get called up or you get traded or whatever the circumstances are. You have to learn everything. Like, you're expected to. It's not like, oh, like, give this guy a break. Like, he just got here. It's like, well, if he doesn't know the playbook, he's not up to speed. Like, he just won't make it. Like, that's the expectation, is that you're going to be, willing to adapt, ready to pick up whatever the new system is, know the plays, not make mistakes right away. And so, these guys, it is like for that 6-7 months, it is an absolute grind. It is nonstop. You're constantly studying. And especially if you're moving back and forth, it becomes just like a complete whirlwind. So I was lucky that I got to also, see that transition and all that goes into it. But yeah, man, it's a lot. It's crazy.
As someone who is always bad, because I constantly feel like an imposition of cultivating sources or developing rapport with sources, or even just like, if when I was around teams a bunch, like even developing a rapport with the team employees, the amount of, or the breadth of the relationships that you clearly build throughout this book is incredibly impressive. What goes in to gaining the trust of the players, the coaches, management? And do you think it helped at all once they got past thinking you were an industry plant because of your name? Did it help at all that you were in, and maybe they didn't know this, but like, did they know that you were kind of in a similar situation where it's like, well, we're all kind of turning down these other opportunities to be here for the most part, and here's this writer who's also betting on themselves because they didn't have a book deal coming into this, and so it's not just you're around, but you're rolling the dice on being around as well.
I think so. I think that did help. I think the first thing is, I knew I was going to be there for I was going to be there for the full season. So like the first thing was, okay, let me not essentially come on too strong, ask all these kind of hard hitting questions, try to get deep with these players because I have a full season to ask the hard questions, to unpack their stories. So the approach was really like, and I was going to be there. Like, I wanted to get to know these guys, just like talking to them off the record, being there every day. And the book focuses on 4 guys. I think I also got lucky that they were just great guys and willing to give me the time and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that the building the trust and building the rapport just came from, we had all these conversations throughout 6, 7 months. It wasn't like I showed up there
Mhm.
and it was like, you have, an hour with this guy, just sit down with him and interview him. It was like, I was talking to these guys, um, multiple times a week. I was there every day, saying what's up to them. And I clearly showed that I wanted to kind of capture their full stories. I mean, I talk to family, friends. Like I was asking them questions, not just about basketball, but you know, their childhood and their hometowns and um, their kind of journeys all the way to this moment. So the trust just kind of gradually builds, I think, throughout the season. And then as you get to, January, February, you can start to kind of get deeper and get to the heart of what you want to write about and what kind of is the core of each of their stories. So, um, yeah. And then I think to your second point, like about kind of them knowing that, this was my dream to write a book and that I was there kind of pursuing my dream alongside them, kind of pursuing their dreams. I think it was more just like the fact that I was there every day, like the fact
Mhm.
that I was willing to kind of go through the grind that um, I wanted to capture like really what it was like, as opposed to, I think if I was just interviewing them from afar, there would have been, I don't know, like less respect for the process because it was
Mhm.
like, when they were flying to Sioux Falls or flying to, wherever the middle of nowhere, uh, in the middle, like, in the morning or connecting through various airports. Like I was there and I was, dedicated and wanted to kind of go through the grind so that I could capture it, in full. So I think that certainly helped. And yeah, I mean, I'm 28, so I was around their age,
Mhm.
um, and yeah, I think that they were able to relate to how badly I wanted to write the book and how much I was willing to go through the grind to get to kind of the finished product in the same way that they were. So, uh, but a huge shout out to all of them because they were awesome to cover and just great guys overall.
Do any of like whether it's the core four of the book where you're talking about Jared Harper, Malcolm Hill, Zylan Cheatham, and Joe Young, or other people, like do any of those relationships, like you're still in contact with any of these people? Have those sustained in any way, shape, or form?
For sure, yeah. I've spoken to all four of them.
Which, by the way, Jared Harper seems like he might be a little bit of a closed book. So I find that very impressive.
He's by far the quietest, and I would say that I think I wouldn't say he was not interested, but he was less interested in the overall book than the other guys. And he's just not a media guy. I mean, he just like he would openly admit that. But again, like I was able to speak to his family, and um, yeah, he's just like such a basketball junkie that he's like the like epitome of like I just want to focus on the game,
Mhm.
and I totally respected that, and I think that that's kind of I hope that came across in my kind of characterization of him. He's just such a like absolute basketball nerd, and just will do like whatever it takes. I'm like definitely stayed in touch with Malcolm and Zylan. I'm actually going to tomorrow. I fly to Orlando for the G League showcase, and Malcolm's playing for the Squadron, so I'll see him there. But yeah, I mean, me and Malcolm talk like monthly, just
Great.
checking in, and uh, I know Malcolm and Zylan at least have gotten the chance to read the book, and I've gotten some feedback from them, which is great. And then the coaches as well. I mean, like you spend so much time with the coaching staff throughout the season, and they were just awesome. So I've stayed in touch with a bunch of people from the organization, which is great.
Has there anyone that you can one divulge that was, maybe in the book or just related to the book that has just reached out with feedback that has stuck with you? And then is there just anyone in general, whether it's a fellow writer you respect or just someone in the industry who has said something to you about the book that has stuck with you as well since it's come out?
Oh man, so many. Like I mean, just like everybody who's reached out. Like honestly, it just the fact that people are reading it. I know that sounds crazy, but it just like it's amazing to get any feedback about it. I'll say that I've heard from some of the coaching staff that it was awesome to feel like they were reliving the season, which to me was really great to hear because obviously uh, that was the goal to capture exactly what that season was like. And, I won't spoil it, but just like for them to say that, it was almost emotional for them to get to have that experience again, is amazing to hear. And then from other writers, I mean, Mirren Fader and Jeff Perlman, Jake Fisher, they did blurbs for me. And, again, the fact those are 3 writers that I like admire, and the fact that they even like read the book is crazy to me. So to hear them have like positive things to say about it means the world. So it's been great.
Getting into just some of the more stuff that happened in the book, one of the sort of flashbulb moments for me, I think it was, I have the chapter right, the tryouts chapter. You get into a lot of just the unique backgrounds, adversities, the ages of some of these players, which one of the Kelvin Davis person who tried out at open tryouts at 62 years old for the Birmingham Squadron. That'll probably stick with me forever. I don't think I'm ever going to forget Kelvin Davis's name from here on out. So like, was there one story or player's background that really just kind of stood out to you, or still is even just sticking with you in particular?
I mean, Kelvin is a great one. I mean, just the basics of his story. He's just 62 years old, and the like fascinating thing about him, he went to tryouts, and I don't think I can't even say for sure that he didn't fully believe that he had a chance to make it. Like, this guy is just the most optimistic, confident, and like, I don't know. He was just such a special person. Like, the fact that he was there and like had trained to go to tryouts, and he was on the court with guys who would play in the NBA that same season. I mean, he was literally a 62-year-old sharing the court with future NBA players. So that was amazing to see. And I think another one, Ron Howard, he gets mentioned in that same tryout chapter because he was another open tryout player who made it to the NBA, or made it to, I should say, to NBA training camp. His story is just like, he was so close multiple times to just like walking away from basketball. The basics of his story are that he was basically like about to quit. This was 2007, I want to say. And finds out, again, this is D-League days. It's really not like a known thing. Is told about like D-League tryouts for the Mad Ants, which is like a team that's close to him, and is kind of like persuaded to go. He shows up there an hour late because he didn't realize that it was in a different time zone. He drives over and shows up an hour late as it is, performs well enough to get invited to the second day of tryouts, but had no idea that there was a second day of tryouts, and he lived 3 hours away. And this was like, it's like 9 p.m. at this point. So he drives all the way home and sleeps for like 2 hours and drives all the way back, and plays well again on like 2 hours of sleep, this like random Mad Ants tryout, and ends up making the team. And a year later, he's at training camp with the Bucks. So there's just so many of these like kind of insane like guys who are about to quit, or just like going through that grind and willing to kind of keep going to pursue their dreams. Those stories are just, to me, like so compelling. So there's a bunch of former G League guys, and obviously the guys I covered in the book, and I think all their stories are really, really fascinating. So
I think one of the things people and the mass audience appreciate most are the wild stories that can come out of situations like this, where being the G League and they know that it's so far, it's the pipeline to the NBA, but it's also galaxies away from the NBA. And so the lifestyle these guys are living is so different, and that it lends itself to these just stories that you hear later on, many of which are in the book, that are just like, holy hell, like what is going on here? And you relayed one of the anecdotes was just Hashim Thabit, when he was in still calling it the G League here, but he forgets his shoes at a previous stop, doesn't have his shoes for the next game, size 18, they can't get him shoes. He's used to being with the Grizzlies, who have someone taking care of all that stuff. And so he's just not able to play because DNP doesn't have shoes, basically.
right.
Is there just, especially because you lived through a lot of the wild travel stuff, and there's just so many good, I would say even bordering on just like harrowing stories in here, where one of the ones that even stuck with me towards the end is I can't remember which chapter exactly it was, but it was either Keep Going, but where Malcolm Hill is driving like 5 hours round trip to get tested for COVID. It's just like this guy's making $37,000 a year to do
Right.
this, and is just making that type of trip. Is there just any wild stories or anecdotes that are in the book, or maybe something you've heard since, or that you lived through during this book that just stick with you the most? And that's an unfair question because you've parsed through this so much and you lived through this so much. But is there just one that is like boggles your mind even now?
I think the one that I always like tell people, the like one that stood out to me the most when I first heard it was the anecdote about the shorts. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Um, and this is just more, this points to like kind of the absurdity of the G League, but this is just like the type of stuff that happens in the G League because, yeah, it's just like you're flying commercial, you're understaffed, and uh, it's under the radar. So it's just like kind of all this stuff doesn't get talked about or covered. But that story is just that this is, I want to say, like in the 2000s. So it's the early days. A team is on a road trip and they get there and they realize that they brought all the jerseys, but they didn't bring all the pairs of shorts. So you'd think no problem, like we can get shorts in time for the game, but that was just not realistic. And so uh, the game has to go on, and they obviously need to wear uniforms when they're on the court. So the solution was that guys on the bench were actually wearing their like compression shorts and then just had towels wrapped around their waists. And so basically it just looked like all these like dudes that just got out of the shower. They're just sitting on the sideline in their jerseys and in towels. And whenever like they checked in for somebody, they literally just exchanged the towel for the shorts. They would just trade and then change right by the scorer's table before checking in. Um, and like nobody knew that. It's just like it wasn't on TV or anything. So it just like, the however many people, couple hundred that were there, got to experience that. And then the story was never told again. So that's insane, obviously. I'll tell one that wasn't in the book that I really wanted to get in there, but couldn't really squeeze it in there. Excuse me. So uh, a team was on a road trip, and usually the home team will organize for like a bus to shuttle the guys from the airport, and then to and from like the arena and the hotel. So the team was at the hotel, and the bus comes to pick them up to take them to the arena. And the player who told me the story was not sure if it was a prank or if it was a mistake, but the bus that picked them up was a party bus. So they all get onto this bus with bottles of champagne, stripper bowls, like like disco lights, like crazy. So it's all these dudes who are like literally going to a game where they're about to play in front of NBA scouts. Could not be a more serious situation. Like they have their careers potentially on the line here. And they pulled up in a party bus and get off with all their stuff, and then play this, massively important game, and then get back on the party bus with stripper balls and stuff. And I just think that image of like all these guys, Caruso was in the G League. Just think of like Alex Caruso pulling up to a game on a party bus. Like, I just think that's such like a only in the G League type of story. So those were a joy to hear about, and was definitely a question. Anytime I spoke to any player, it was like, just tell me your craziest G League story. And I included, a handful of them in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ones in there. The travel ones are like so frustrating to read about because there's like an element of just there's the one in there where the driver of the bus was too tired and so a team coach ends up, and it's just like that's just infuriating, like to actually have to read about it. This is what they have to go through to get to these games. They're leaving at such wild times that they can't even find like an open food place until 2 in the morning, and it's just some like fast food joint at that late at night. And they so like reading stuff like that was we need to hear it, and they're very enlightening, but it almost makes my blood boil that they have to actually go through all of this just to play a game for such a little amount of money, even though the stakes are obviously incredibly high.
No, it is wild. And like, I tell people like it is obviously one step away from the NBA. I mean, these guys are getting called up or guys are being sent down every day practically. But it just doesn't, it doesn't feel like one step away. I mean, the
Mhm.
experience is so different. And yeah, all those images, I mean, those are the ones that kind of stick with you um, when you cover the G League, and when you hear all these like stories about, because I think it's obviously way better than it used to be. It still probably needs to get better, but the stories that kind of left a lasting impression were those ones that were from kind of the early days. I mean, that story about, they're driving through the middle of the night because their flight got canceled. And the drive, I want to say, was like, 10 hours because the weather conditions obviously
Mhm.
weren't good. And they couldn't find a place to eat. And they finally find like a just like terrible fast food restaurant that probably was not the place to eat at, but they were all starving. They eat there, and then all of them get food poisoning for the rest of
Yeah.
the bus ride. The idea that like all of these guys are on a coach bus sick to their stomachs, like, you know, just because that's kind of what the experience is like in the G League. I tried my best to include, a handful of those just to paint that picture of this is what the grind looks like. People kind of um, have an idea of like, yeah, this is, it's not the glitz and glamour of the NBA, but I don't think they really grasp just how arduous and, insane that grind can be. So yeah, hopefully they can
Everyone's,
capture
I
that.
think, sort of understands this about the G League, where it's viewed as this stepping stone to something else for everyone involved, including the coaches. Like they want it to be a temporary stop, and so it's just known. But I think what struck me, it was pretty early in the book. It was in the Winning Matters chapter, and then it becomes this reoccurring theme throughout the book, is acknowledging that, but then also trying to build the Birmingham Squadron in the image of an actual team that cares about winning, what's actually happening on the court, and not necessarily, yes, everything's framed through this is what can get you to the NBA, but you have basketball games to win if you want the attention that will get some of these players to the NBA.
Mhm.
Did it was it surprising at all for it to be such an open-ended, or not open-ended, but such an open point of discussion, like among the coaches in the roster, where they just, now it's like, you guys don't want to be here, but like we need to figure this out anyway.
For sure. I think you have to. I mean, you have to acknowledge it. You have to talk about it. And I think like people in the G League will tell you, like the G League, like the people will say the G League is the place that nobody wants to be, because truly nobody's goal is to be there. They all have ambitions of going to the NBA or playing at just a higher level. Um, and so, yeah, I think if you don't acknowledge that off the bat like that, it's just not going to work. I mean, everybody knows that. You just have to talk about it. And I think to your point about like, they still have basketball games to win. I think what surprised me is just how much winning uh, is important to scouts. And I think that obviously is what creates that kind of, um, it all kind of works together, because if you are able to communicate to these players that, which is true. I mean, from my experience, just following it and seeing the players getting called up, like if you're able to communicate to these players that if we win games, if we play team basketball, if you buy into a role, if you play unselfish, if you are, a good teammate, a positive presence in the locker room, those are the things that lead to call ups. And I think that if I think in maybe the early days it was a little different, but if it was the case that like just players who put up big numbers and like guys who average 30, or guys who were running the offense or getting double doubles were the guys that got called up, then you'd have a major problem where you'd have all these guys just playing, kind of showcase AAU type basketball. But the fact that you're able to show these guys and communicate to them like winning, like that chapter says, winning matters, and winning is kind of, um, a way to get recognized. And that, obviously the way to win is for us to play as a team. Um, I think it all kind of comes together. But that how much that is emphasized did definitely surprise me, because it is, I would say, the number one thing that, because they'll talk about all the time how to get called up, because
Mhm.
everyone obviously is trying to get called up. And that, how to get called up is let's win some games and let's play together. Um, and let's, get noticed for doing the little things, for doing, the right things, for playing team basketball. I think that the players, at least in my experience covering the squadron, bought into that. And then when you buy into that, that's when kind of good things start happening for you. So, um, yeah, it's definitely emphasized from day one that that's the road to the NBA.
And then when there's towards the end of the book, and I probably will pronounce his name wrong, but Coach Panon, I always think it's
Panone.
Panon. So he has this speech about Malcolm Hill. So like where you're still driving home that point of doing the little bit, and like when you get to the end of the book, like people, that speech will resonate with you. Where I think it was him that was giving it, right?
Yeah,
About they're
yeah.
watching the film session and they have like the montage of Malcolm Hill and all the stuff that he's doing to reiterate that no, you scoring all this from scratch creation, all these necessarily highlight or like box score, like bonkers box score stat lines aren't going to get you to the NBA because they have the guys that are getting those at the NBA level already. That really sticks with you. Like throughout even the way that it's framed is even just a lot of what the coaches said in this book, the way that they were so blunt about it and so passionate about it. And then to frame Malcolm Hill getting that two-way contract from Chicago at the time, that was something that resonated with me. Like even after them saying it a bunch throughout the book, to sit there and then communicate it to the players to that level is just something that even sticks with me now.
I'm glad, man, because I felt like one of my concerns writing the book was, is this all getting, too repetitive? Because honestly, that's what it is. Like throughout the season, they're constantly reiterating the same things. And I think that part of the reason is it's just it doesn't get through to certain guys. And you just got to you just got to stick on it and just keep saying it over and over again until guys get it. Um, but I think that the fact that when Malcolm, gets called up, that they're able to say like, look, this happened. Like you guys saw it happen. Like this is evidence that what we've been telling you throughout the season works, and that there is a road beyond, just scoring a bunch of points or leading the team in X, Y, and Z. I think that is when it really starts to resonate with players, is like when they can see it kind of lived out in front of them. So, that scene stuck with me, and I knew like as soon as it happened, I'm in the film session. I'm like, this is a chapter. Like this is something that I need to come across clearly. So I'm glad that stuck with you as well.
Do you have any sense of whether because there's I mentioned it earlier at the top where they had that sort of players only meeting. And that was the moment that cemented, oh, okay, at least some of these players are viewing it as we're going to try and care about the relationships we're building here. And then you mentioned, Joe Young organizing team dinners. And it does seem, you mentioned some group chats too throughout this. Do you have any sense of whether is that camaraderie that the squadron had during this season, is that like par for the course in the G League? Do you think it was like they stood out in any way for that? Because honestly, this is the only G League team I have this much information on now. And so
Right.
that stands out to me. And I'm wondering, just because of the nature of the G League, whether that's actually common across all these other organizations.
I think it is more common than you'd think
Okay.
nowadays, but I think that I also got lucky because I think that the team that I was with specifically, like, really had great camaraderie. And I mentioned in the book that they had a bad experience, the coaching staff, a few seasons prior, because they kind of built the wrong roster, that didn't care about the right things and wasn't as invested, and dealt with a team that was completely disjointed. And so that was kind of informed them assembling this team. And I think like I fully understand that. I'm sure people read this book and think like, oh, were they really like that? It was really that, like there was that camaraderie. They were that together. And honestly, like that's how it was. Like I was shocked too. Like I thought there was going to be tons of fireworks. I thought it was going to be, I figured teams would clash. Like I just thought that was the nature of the G League. It's kind of just by nature of it being a league that everyone is trying to get out of, kind of like a cutthroat environment where it's like
Mhm.
guys are competing with each other. But my experience was that these guys care a lot about each other. And I think that there's uh, there's something kind of unifying in like everyone having the same dream and everyone having the same goal. Because you'll see like if a guy gets called up, like all the other players will post about it on social media, congratulate him. Now I'm
Mhm.
sure that they would like prefer to be the guy who got called up and would trade
Right.
places with that guy in a second. But there is like a camaraderie and like just the chase, I think. And so guys do, genuinely root for each other to make it. And certainly when they're in the NBA, like I remember Zylan telling me about watching Malcolm when he was in the NBA, and he's screaming at the TV, and like, he's just like, he's like a fan, he's trying to, he
Yeah.
really wants to, if he makes it, we all make it type kind of mentality. So that was like refreshing to follow, and certainly made it easier than, having to write about a team that was, at each other's heads and stuff like that. So that part was a lot easier.
There's two other moments too that kind of drive that home. And one, I don't want to spoil because it was one of my favorite parts of the book, but there's just an injury at one point, and the response from the team to that was like, that will stick with you, because again, you just wouldn't expect it, because I mean, you might not even expect it in the NBA all the time because it's so competitive and it's a business, but like that stuck with me. And then I think Cheatham when Miles Powell ends up going to the NBA, or was it like he's just so excited and he acknowledges that like, yeah, I want to be there too, but to see him get there is just so like means so much to me, and that's so great. Did I distort those
Yeah,
details at all?
no, that was it. Miles Powell, also just an insane story of him kind of coming back from injury and getting called up to the NBA like right away. This is during Omicron. And yet it stood out to me that like one of the first people he called was Island. And, these guys just met through basketball, and he calls him like when he's still, um, on the plane about to take off, and he just got the news and he's sobbing. And, yeah, I just think it's it captures so much. One, like how much goes into it and how emotional it can be. And that kind of bond between the players, because Island, is jumping up and down cheering for this dude. And, it kind of means that a spot got filled that Zala didn't get. So that definitely stood out to me as well.
Yeah, the people buy the book and read the Miles Powell's just plain story too. That was just that's one of that. I thought that's worth getting the book alone. So Omicron, we've talked about it a few times now. The G League is just, to have to live through it for an entire season is just, there's going to be all these curveballs regardless. But now you're throwing the Omicron variant into the equation.
Right.
What was it like having to go through all this, cover this? Just the travel logistics from you're living this with the players. What was that entire experience like? And was there at any point, because as someone who covering the NBA at this time, I can't keep track of the rosters at this point. Like there are guys that I've never heard of that are starting games, and it's happening on a daily basis. You have to relay so much of this information in the book, by the way. This is a tangent, but like that must have been exhaustive, having to like go through all these just like other teams that weren't necessarily directly related to the squadron, but it was like tangentially related because of what it meant. Like, and so what was just that entire experience like? And as the quick follow-up to that is, was your access or like the finality, like the production of this book, ever in jeopardy because of what was going on?
I mean, the whole time was like incredibly tense and very isolating. And I was super anxious because the last thing I wanted was for me to get COVID, and then I'm around the team, for me to put the team at risk or any of these players at risk, because they were all so worried about, this was this incredible opportunity. The NBA was dealing with the crisis, and teams were decimated, and they were looking to the G League to, for relief and calling up players left and right. So it's this massive opportunity for G League players, but it's also like incredibly nerve wracking, because like the worst possible scenario is for you to get called up and then have that kind of dream ripped away from you because you caught COVID,
Yeah.
or to get COVID during this stretch and then miss out on, potential call ups. So, guys are like excited, but they're also like very nervous. And that, I think, paralleled how I was feeling at the time. But I was going through the same, like I was wearing a mask. I got a booster when the team got boosters. I, was basically keeping my distance during that stretch. I was getting tested by the team. And so even then I was like very cautious during that period. So it certainly hurt the access a little bit, just because like everything was so crazy during that time. But I will say that obviously, and you've read the book, it did add such a layer of like drama and intrigue to just this season. That was kind of when it started. Like I had something that I felt like I could sell. Like I hadn't sold the book yet. This becomes like the year of the G League. I mean, the number of call ups, it was double the previous high just because of Omicron. So um, I think it was very much the same experience the players were having was the experience I was having, where I was like very nervous and very stressed, but also like understood that this was like a massive um, opportunity. Is kind of the I feel bad saying that because it was such a
Right.
bad thing for the world at large, but it did kind of add such a layer of drama and another kind of crazy thing to follow to this. It was kind of just a normal G League season, so um, it was you kind of hold your breath for that full time. And if you can remember, it kind of, not that it passed, but it kind of quieted pretty quickly. It was like a month of absolute chaos, and then it's like mid-December to mid-January, and then by like end of January at least there's like a return to somewhat normalcy. But um, I kind of blacked out for a month there because like the players were all over the place, and I was just like following them and trying to stay healthy and on all these flights, and it was like, oh my god, this is a disaster, but it's also incredibly exciting. So all the emotions, man. But it definitely changed the course of the book, and I think added something to it that enabled me to eventually sell it. So
Yeah, and I didn't even think about this coming into this interview, but so I'm in the middle of the book, and you're hearing about all these other G League players being called up, but you're invested in the squadron during this book. Like that's the like you're reading it, you're invested in. Like, when are these? Come on, when are one of these guys going to get called up? When is it their turn? So you immediately go from that suspense to then dealing with Malcolm Hill or Zylan Cheatham getting called up. It's like, well, are they going to have COVID and they're not going to be able to play? And so there was that, like, not necessarily something I detected while I was reading it, but you do transition from Omicron just in the background of like such a huge portion of this entire thing. So you're right. It's, you hate framing it as an opportunity or like, but it's an important theme, and I think it does help the compelling nature of the book. How do you keep your own sanity though throughout this process? Did the insanity help at all, where maybe it's because you just didn't have a moment to stop, breathe, and think about it? But like, you're living a pretty isolated lifestyle at this point yourself, and so how did you not go absolutely off the wall?
maybe I did a little bit. No, I don't know. I think it does. There is something I will say. You look back at it, and it is like, how did I kind of hold it together? And I'm not going to say I did a great job of doing that, because I was definitely stressed and running all over the place. And but I think, especially like when you're like, I had a clear goal in mind. I was super passionate about it, and the whole thing was like really exciting for me. So like as I'm going through this, and as I'm like dealing with all these kind of random things that pop up, and kind of making these decisions on a whim, I kind of do have that in the back of my mind. Like, this is all going to hopefully work out. And, this is also what I signed up for. So um, it went by. I mean, there were moments when, for sure, like I moved down there, I didn't know anybody. It was very lonely,
Mhm.
isolating. By the end, I was ready to come home for sure. But um, like as a whole, it went by incredibly fast, because it just was like there was something going on every day. There was something to do every day. There was, a team event, a game, a practice. Guy got called up. Now I'm on a flight to Miami. You know, now I'm going to Atlanta. Like, he's back here. What am I like? I just was constant. I was just on alert the entire time, and then kind of blinked, and 7 months had passed, and I was moving back to New York with all this material. So um, I would say it was like insane for 7 months. I took a little break, and then had to write the book. So that it was like insane for another 4 months. But all in the end, like, incredibly rewarding, and just super fortunate that it worked out.
One of the things this book does a fantastic job of highlighting is the disparate lifestyles between the NBA and then the G League. It made, and I don't even know if this was its intention, and so I'll make clear everything I'm saying is my thoughts on this. I was getting so angry at some of the things I was reading, where the G League showcase in particular, like that segment of the book, where yes, I understand you don't know who these executives are, these scouts are, these all these employees from teams are. You don't want them seeing you out in Vegas partying. I get that element of it, but you don't want them seeing you eating Chick-fil-A when they don't pay you enough to be eating these five-star meals, or they don't want to see you holding an energy drink. When how else are you supposed to? And I mean, I consume a lot of energy drinks, but like, how else are you supposed to be standing when you're going through all this travel, when you're going through this hectic schedule, when you're practicing so much, when you're reading about these guys who are still getting up to get in their early workouts? It's just like, did that strike you at all as you're going through this and hearing these things? And was it, at any point tough for you to remain impartial on that thing where it's, I think you even mentioned this podcast, like, yes, they have to like do a better job to improve these conditions. And the NBA did a victory lap when they raised G League salaries above like 40 grand a year ago, whatever it was. It's like, that's fucking nothing. And I understand that these players are not the drivers of the revenue for these organizations, but like, if this is actually a pipeline to the NBA, it just feels like there should be more resources in place to make life not necessarily lavish, but at least more palatable or like navigable for these guys.
I think no question that like resources could be better, the pay could be better. And like, yeah, like even then it's increased. Like since the G League Union was formed, it has gone up. I'm not going to say significantly, but it has gone up pretty much
$5,000 since the
right.
G League Union.
So, I mean, they are trying to improve it, and it definitely does need to be improved. And one of the like core themes that I hit on in the book is the idea that like all of these guys could be making more money overseas.
Yeah.
So that's like a huge element of this. Like they're all sacrificing to be in the G League. I think to your first point, there needs to be like a bigger appreciation. I think across the board from basically anybody, fans, reporters, whatever, just for like how much goes into this pursuit of the NBA. I mean, again, that idea that like you can't even really be seen eating certain things. You have to be thinking about how people are seeing you. It goes way deeper than that. I mean, energy on the bench. Don't be late ever. Be early for everything. What's your temperament on the court? Are you not hustling back? Are you arguing foul calls? Like scouts actually nitpick at those things because they have these massive lists and they're just trying to narrow them down because players are so, they're not interchangeable, but they're close to interchangeable. They're pretty similar in level and fit and all these kind of things. So like they're looking for an excuse to basically cancel you out. So you can't afford to make any mistakes. And like mistakes on the court, sure, but mistakes in any kind of like area of life, like just in your diet, in your work habits. Are you out too late? Are you, things that like any of the stuff that could come out, it could definitely be the difference between you making it and not making it. So one, there just needs to be that understanding and that appreciation, I think. So I hope that the book captured that. And two, yeah, I think that like from the player perspective, the important thing, and I do think that this is the case, but players just need to be aware of this is how realistic your chances are of making it. Is it worth it for you to be going through this grind? Now, like that could be at least mitigated or reduced, like if they get paid more, the conditions improve. But like, I think there is an understanding for most of these G League guys coming in, like I have a shot, or this is what I'm sacrificing. Like players and coaches, executives, agents, I think that they're pretty transparent with these guys about like just what they're getting themselves into, what they're sacrificing. So you want to have a lot of these guys in the G League, like, completely clueless as to what their situation is, if that makes sense. So like that would be, I think, it would be harder to stomach if it was like these guys don't even realize like kind of what they're getting into and what's on the table for them, what they're sacrificing. But for sure, like it is crazy to see up close, like how different the lifestyle is and, those disparities between the G League and the NBA.
That's what makes everything even more wild is some of these guys have all these lucrative 6-7 figure offers that they could get playing overseas, and yet they're here. And there's a great chapter, which I won't get into detail here, but you kind of have the contrast between two players where one who just spent so long in the G League to get his taste of NBA action versus someone who decided like, no, I'm going to provide for my family and make all this money. And that was just like to see, and then they go back and forth. That was a great part of the book as well. And I think to the original question I have for you, one of the biggest compliments I can pay this book is whenever you consume something or hear something or read something that makes you rethink maybe how you're covering or reacting to what's happening in, let's use the NBA basketball specifically. It's happened to me a bunch. And like, I'm snarky as fuck on Twitter, but like the tenor of my jokes have changed where like, I make sure it's not personal, and you don't want to inadvertently take away from someone's work ethic if you're trying to make fun of something that happens. And this is one of those books that will make you rethink any jokes that you might make about having a no name, like a no name player when you see them, or jokes you might make about the G League or the level of competition when it's, I've even probably written offhanded things about, not this year, but to use this year's Pistons as an example, about them like needing to be relegated or something. This is one of those books that'll stop and make you think like, I probably won't disparage the G League in that way, like so offhandedly, because of what these players are going through, and how much it just how like the level of sacrifice that they're all making to some extent, even if those lucrative offers aren't on the table. They could be building in a career, building out a career in another industry, or doing like some of these guys were doing at points
Right.
anyway. So that is one of the biggest comments. Like that sticks with you, just like it changes the way you look at even, yes, everyone knows technically what the G League is all about, but like this book really gives you an inside look about what these players are going through. And it's just, in so many instances, it's just, the word for me to describe it is unfathomable. I'm certainly not built for it. And there are these guys who they're either doing it for years on end, or they're also doing it for years on end while they have. It'd be different if it was a last option for them. And to get to the NBA, maybe it is, but like, no, a lot of these players have some pretty lucrative alternatives on the table, and they're choosing to go through this, which boggles my mind even more.
Me too, man. I mean, well, thank you. And that definitely stuck with me too. And I think like there's just a like, even just for like fans to, for me at least, to have an appreciation for like even like what the guys who come from the G League are doing on an NBA court. Like I think like I had a tendency for sure, and like look, this it's like it's Twitter, like whatever. It's like people can say whatever, but I definitely had a tendency to look at certain guys on the court and be like, what is he doing? Why is he out there? Like, how is this guy valuable? Um, and I think you see it with guys like Patrick Beverly, for example, where it's like, he can be a pest and he's doing all these things that fans might look at and be like, this is annoying. Like what value does he actually bring? And the more you're around fringe guys, and obviously Beverly's not a fringe guy now, but guys who have carved out roles, who non-traditional roles, you realize that that's how Beverly is. That's how he's sticking in the NBA. That's how he's earning these contracts. That's what NBA coaches value. Like when he's doing these things, it's because that's what his role is, and that's like there's a different appreciation when you see, you know, PJ Tucker or Alex Caruso or Gary Payton or I'm trying to think of an example of guys who barely, PJ Tucker just stand in the corner, he'll shoot threes and he'll do all the dirty work. And yeah, I mean, not that people didn't have an appreciation for that game or his game before, but I think it's a
They had a
different
bigger
level.
appreciation when he was actually taking those threes from the corner. And
That's true. That's true. I think it's just a different level. Once you see it, and hopefully once you read this book, you realize that like there is a lot of sacrifice that goes into just like those guys being willing to do those things and being willing to accept those roles. So for sure, it changed my perspective of obviously the G League and the NBA and basketball in general. So hopefully it does the same for other people.
So was it easy then, like once this whole process is over, was it easy to sell the book after what happened, or was that still like a challenge?
Still a challenge for sure. I mean, it was I was able to get an agent, which helps a lot. And shout out to my agent, Joseph Perry. He was great. And yeah, I mean that certainly helps because they do a lot of work for you. But first time author, a niche subject like the G League, not players that are well known. Like I knew that going in that it was going to be a massive challenge, but it did still take a lot of time to get a publisher on board. But yeah, shout out to University of Nebraska Press. They believed in it, and again, like the support's been amazing. So yeah, I'm super grateful and thankful that somebody took a chance on it and that people are enjoying it and reading it. So
Now, Miran did tell me that you already know that you want to write another book, which, by the way, I'll liken this to, even if you're passionate about this, like if you're asking a marathon runner immediately after they cross the finish line, like, what do you want? When are you going to run your next marathon? And so I've like, when people ask, actors coming out of like these long series or these authors who are going through the process of writing an entire book. Like, well, when's your next book or what's it going to be about? The fact that you want to write another book after going through that process impresses me to no end.
Thank you.
Because I would absolutely be someone that would be, no, I'm never going to write another book. Like, no, this is way too much work. Go ahead.
There's an element of like you kind of like you want to capitalize on the little momentum you get, because to like pitch another one or to like keep going. I'm sure as soon as like I'm getting into the actual weeds of doing the next book, I'll be like, what was I thinking? But like right now, for sure, book one didn't deter me, and I think the response to book one and just like having it out there, it kind of gives you like a little burst. But like I don't want people to get it messed up. Like it is definitely kind of torture going through it a little bit, but it's rewarding too.
I mean, I had anxiety just you talking about after being around the team for 7-8 months, then having to like go and pour over all this material and write about it. It's just like that's giving me anxiety, the thought of that undertaking. But if you could, your next book can be about anything, any subject source material you want. What would you, as of right now, what would you choose if you could?
So I have a couple ideas kind of working a little bit.
You don't need to divulge them here.
I'm down to talk about them a little bit. Hope maybe someone will hear this. But I think, I mean, first of all, I think it would be so cool. I've always had this kind of like dream of like turning Life in the G into like a series where I'm able to follow like 4 different players. And like, again, this would be super tough, I think, because just selling the G League over and over again is probably a challenge. But, having like 4 different players, because every story is very unique. And again, 4 different players trying to get to the NBA. What are their journeys like? And I think the next book could be, less history and more just like getting into the weeds of like pursuing that dream. And then the other one, just to tease it a little bit, is focused on another pipeline of the NBA. And it's like a little bit, I guess it's focusing more on international basketball. So, I guess I'll leave it at that. But just like another increasingly important pipeline of the NBA that, it's undercovered, I would say, at this point. So
that, and I think even that comes across in the book a little bit. I think some people will be surprised to know like how much money some of the international leagues will pay some of these guys. And I think it's known actually, like the extent that it's known, the WNBA players, like how much of a disparity there is between their WNBA salaries and what they can make overseas. But it's not talked about as much with the NBA, I think in part because the G League exists. And so a lot of people just like, well, why wouldn't you just go to the G League rather than go overseas? It's like, no, like for a lot of these guys, there's a lot of money overseas. So that would be a fascinating read for sure.
I hope so, man. I hope publishers think the same thing. But yeah, I mean, like to your point, like Joe Young, who's one of the 4 main characters, he could have made $3 million in China the season that I was with him, and he accepted. He got a bonus for. Oh no, he didn't. He was a drafted player, so he's making less than $40K for
$37,000 instead of $3 million is.
It's a pretty big sacrifice. Yeah. That's a choice for sure. That's a big one. So yeah, and there's a lot of guys who are doing, not quite that big of a jump, because Joe was an NBA guy and he was established in China, but certainly 6-figure contracts in the Euro League and, spread out throughout the world. Like
even one of the numbers there's a bunch of different numbers. One of those like 20,000 a month. Because I think that's 2 months you just made more than your entire G League salary was.
And then when these guys get these 10-day contracts, they've already doubled their G League salaries in 10 days. It's like, how is that even possible? And some of them don't even play. They just go up there 10 days, they sit on the bench, and they get paid double for a full grind, like a grind of a season.
And was it Malcolm Hill? Was it Malcolm Hill or was it Zylan Cheatham talking about the per diem that they got and they're living off that? This was more than their G League.
That was Squeaky Johnson. That was the guy.
Okay.
Yeah. That was, I mean, that story too, where he's on the plane and they hand out the per diems for like this little road trip. And it's like $1,500 or something for, a couple days on the road or something crazy. And he just watches the players immediately start to just bet the money right away on a card game. They just throw it into the pot. And Squeaky's like putting this in his backpack. He's like, I need this. Like, I absolutely need this. This is what I get on my like biweekly checks in the D League. I think that illustrates again that disparity like to a T. Just him being there and seeing how much it matters to them. They'll just bet it right away. Crazy.
Is there anything about the book I haven't asked about or that you want to talk about, or maybe even something that you wished more people during these interviews asked about that hasn't been asked that you want to touch upon?
No, man, I think we like pretty much covered it. I mean, again, I just think like a huge shout out to the organization and all the people that I followed. I think like I know I've said this throughout the interview, but like me being able to have the access that I had and um, to be lucky enough to be around the players that I was around and the coaches that I was around. That's what enabled me to write this book and to have the book that I have. So yeah, any chance I can get to kind of just express my gratitude to them and yeah, to everyone who supported the book and to you and to all the kind of podcasts I've been on. Um, it's been awesome. So I think that's the main thing, the main message I would have.
My main message is buy the book being held up on screen if you're watching Life in the G. It is really, really good. This doesn't mean anything, but I do read books that don't make it to the little setup I have behind me. This will be making it to the setup because I found it was recommended to me by Mirren, so I won't pretend that I found it on my own. I'm so glad she recommended it. It is so good and enlightening. So holding it up again, buy it, Life in the G. The link will be in the podcast and YouTube description. Follow Alex on the Twitter machine at Alex_Squadron, spelled exactly as the team that he owns. At SQUADRON. If you write another book, I'll be purchasing it immediately and reading it. So best of luck to you, and thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, I can't say enough good things about this book.
Thank you, man. It's my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me.